Good morning, everybody. Welcome back, divas and dudes who may be joining us from home. Again, my name is Raquel DeHoyos, and this is week 3 of Foods We Love, our series where we're going over classic kind of comfort foods, but with a slightly healthy twist or just an interesting twist, and also talking about different elements of food. So we've talked a little bit about sweet and sort of our cravings and connections with sweet foods. And then we had creamy also. We're going to do a little bit of that today. But today we're focusing on salty. So we'll get to some of that as we go through the lesson. But today I have a special recipe for you. It has a couple components. We have a delicious sample for you all to try that's already been baked in advance, just because this does require some baking. But we're making a shepherd's pie today. Has anybody heard of that or made that before, a version of that? Okay, that's kind of a nice classic comfort recipe. It's a bit of a casserole style because it has 2 layers to it. So it has a meat layered with some veggies in it and some spices. And then it has on top mashed potatoes. But I'm going to make them a little bit different this time. And I'll walk you through that. Some of this I've done in advance just so that we have enough time to get through class today. But I also want to kind of hear from you all when it comes to kind of your classic comfort foods, salty, not sweet this week. What are some of your favorites that you like to make at home, or things that you enjoy maybe in restaurants that you go to?
Anything in a crock pot.
Anything in a crock pot? Okay, that's a great way to cook, right? Because you can just kind of, you guys remember Ron Popeil's set it and forget it guy, right? Okay, just kind of put everything in one pot, turn it on low, especially when you're making cuts of meat that require some time to kind of just break down and get nice and tender. That's a great vehicle for doing meals. Anything else that are kind of your favorites?
Different versions of rice and lentil combinations cooked into a porridge-like consistency.
Okay.
And then tempered with cumin, butter, and garlic or something. Or veggies if you like.
That sounds wonderful.
He's the one who makes all these versions at his home.
Yeah, that sounds wonderful. And great source of nutrition.
Traditionally, it's not spicy. It's just salt and turmeric in it.
Oh, okay.
And you crave that when you're really sick and not feeling well.
Yes, and turmeric, great antioxidant, anti-inflammatory, right? So you've got all, and any kind of lentils, I mean, that's a great source of protein. Oh, yeah.
And you can add veggies to it.
That's a great one. Okay, we might need a recipe for that, I think. Okay, well, so I'm going to walk us through kind of, you have the recipe here. I want to point out, so I have made a couple of changes to the recipe you have in front of you. So I just want to point out a few things here. One of the items that I did leave off was the milk in the cauliflower mash. So we have 2 different components. The first is going to be this mashed potato, but it's made with yellow potatoes and cauliflower, a combination of both. But the thing that's missing is 2 tablespoons of just regular milk. If you prefer low-fat milk or whatever, 1% milk, I'm just using regular whole milk, but it's 2 tablespoons. And then on the bottom for our meat filling, I am using actually today a 93.7% ground beef, grass-fed beef. You can use any kind, honestly, whatever your budget allows, whatever you prefer. I'm going for more of a beefy, kind of leaner choice because we're going to add a lot of flavor to it. And so that's what we're using today. And my apologies for the revisions. It's been a long week. I was still in the middle of moving and it's done. So it's like, okay, Raquel she's got a little more brain capacity this week. Okay, so we're going to start with the cauliflower mash. And so in that, we have obviously some cauliflower, this beautiful cauliflower here. But what I've done in advance is taken just a basic yellow potato. There are all different varieties of potatoes. You could use just a regular russet if that's what you like for your mashed potatoes. By all means, use that. The reason I like yellow potatoes is because they tend to be a little more creamier and they have kind of that waxier consistency. And so they're great for if you're making maybe a potato salad and you want the potatoes to hold up a little bit more. This is a great choice, or even like a red potato. I think they have great flavor. And so anytime I'm doing this sort of style of dish, I go for yellow potatoes. HEB typically just has this one variety, but there are many varieties of yellow potatoes out there. So if maybe you visit a farmer's market and you see some different ones, go ahead and try them in your recipes where you might usually use just a regular potato because they're quite delicious. So what I did in advance was I just kind of parboiled. I just peeled it, You could even leave the peel on though, because that's extra what for us in our diet? Fiber. So just give them a good scrub and just, chop them up, dice them up into big chunks. I've got some here in the pot. I'm going to turn that up a little bit because what we're going to do is add just 1.5 cups of the cauliflower. And so what I tend to do is just remove this green core, right, and the leaves. When I'm making something like a cauliflower steak, what I'll do is leave all of that on and just slice it into these nice thick steaks and then marinate it with whatever seasonings you want. That recipe that I shared with you all just before the holidays, the cabbage steaks, I tend to use flavorings like that when I make my cauliflower steaks as well. So you can take the same ingredients and just put that on cauliflower and it's delicious. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take my knife and cut this part out because I don't need this whole cauliflower. And I just need 1.5 cups. And you can use, the florets, and sometimes people will toss this part because it's a little too hard, but we're going to basically boil it, so you're okay to use that as well. But I don't want this part because, as you can see, that's pretty fibrous and that's hard to break down. We're going to get rid of that. And basically, some of these pieces that have just kind of naturally fallen off here, I'm just going to take those and cut those into smaller pieces and measure out about 1.5 cups. And add that to our pot that's simmering here to my left. And cauliflower, if you think about all of the cruciferous vegetables, a lot of times right now, it's still winter, right? And our immunity is one thing that we want to keep in check, make sure we're strong and healthy for all these colds and viruses and whatnot that are going around. And oftentimes people reach for the oranges, right? All the citrus, because that's a great source of vitamin C. But a lot of people forget that things like cruciferous vegetables, the brassica family, so anything like broccoli, the Brussels sprouts, and cauliflower are also a great source of vitamin C. So remember that next time you're out shopping at the grocery store. It's not just the citrus that are great for that.
I have a question. So since vitamin C is water soluble and you're boiling it in water and you're taking it out, my concern would be that you would lose all the nutrients in that water. So it's better to roast it or...
That is a great question. Yeah, so
stir fry it.
So when you're boiling or steaming something, you are, yes, some of that the vitamins are coming out in that. Now, if you keep the water, like if you're making a pasta sauce, you're kind of keeping that in there. But yes, doing something like roasting, fantastic, because that will help preserve that a little bit better. Great question. Okay, so that's about 1.5 cups, right? I've got this going at a great, nice little high simmer here. And I'm just going to add this just to finish, you want it basically kind of fork tender, right? So I'll just put the lid back on that for a bit, just till that comes through. And then what we're going to do is we'll drain that and we'll add a bunch of other delicious ingredients to that. So I'm just going to set the rest of this aside. You could roast the rest of this. Anybody have favorite recipes for cauliflower aside from roasting things?
Put generous amount of olive oil over it and just salt and pepper and roast it and serve it whole.
Yes, cauliflower is one of my favorites. I had there's a cookbook that I have and it's a recipe for cauliflower, but you don't even cut it. It's kind of like you're saying, you just take the whole thing, but you brine it. And the brine has a lot of delicious seasonings, and you brine it basically overnight so it absorbs all the flavor. And then you roast it, and you can make like a nice little sauce, kind of similar to the one that I did with the cabbage steak. So it has like a sesame tahini, and it's fantastic. And it's
my mother makes a whole cauliflower with a curry recipe, so the whole cauliflower goes in the pressure cooker, and then the spices are poured over the curry she makes, and then she does the pressure cook at whatever time it takes for the cauliflower.
That sounds wonderful too.
And it just comes out whole with everything cooked.
Ooh, that sounds delicious. A curry is great for this kind of weather that we're having today too, right? Okay, so I'm going to let that go, and then I'm going to move us on to the meat filling, and we'll get back to the cauliflower mash in just a moment. There's a couple more ingredients we're going to add that'll really kind of kick up the flavor there. You could just make it like a regular mashed potato. Again, for this recipe, if you were like, I'm not really a fan of cauliflower, I'll give it a try once, Raquel, but I want to go back to my regular old mashed potatoes. Fantastic. You could also do this with make the filling and do like a sweet potato topping. I've seen that done as well, and that's delicious. So you could just, steam up some or roast or boil sweet potatoes, or even take the Chipotle sweet potato recipe that I gave you all before the holidays and make that as the topping. That'd be great.
My question is if you've ever used the rice cauliflower in the bag at HEB, which is steamable. And you could use that as the base.
That would be great too. Yeah. Did you all hear that? So HEB, I know Trader Joe's, I've seen it there too. A lot of grocery stores now carry in the freezer section the riced cauliflower. You could easily also just buy your cauliflower, put it in a food processor, or just chop it up really fine and then freeze that. Like if you were afraid you weren't going to get to it and it was going to go bad, although it's pretty resilient, so it takes a little while for it to go bad. But yeah, riced cauliflower is a great tip as well. Sometimes we're not sure, we go through the freezer section or some of the aisles in the grocery store and we're like, what do I need to build sort of that pantry for in a pinch when I don't have a lot of time? What can I do? And that's a great ingredient to use. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is start on our meat filling, and I'm just using a regular yellow onion. This is actually a sweet onion, which is one of my favorites, and we're going to use a whole onion, and that'll be just the base. So I'm going to dice this, and we'll add that to our pan. Oh, sorry. The other thing I'm going to add to my pan while I'm dicing my onion is 2 tablespoons of olive oil. So we'll add 2 tablespoons of olive oil to the pan. Let that warm up a little bit.
On the milk, if you don't have milk, can you use dried milk?
Yeah, I don't see why not.
Powdered milk?
Yeah, powdered milk would work just fine, right? Because you're just adding a little bit of water or liquid to yeah, absolutely. Powdered milk always has kind of a slightly sweeter taste, I think, which I kind of like in my mashed potatoes. So if you're not, you don't have an issue with that, by all means. And powdered milk, if you don't tend to have a lot of, like, you don't want to keep a whole container, maybe it's just you at home, right? And you don't want the container to spoil. I have that trouble. I don't drink a lot of milk because I can't, but I'm always trying to find a small container, and sometimes this is the smallest, or maybe you can find one that's half the size.
So I sometimes will drink tea with it, and it's just a little bit. And if I'm going away, I just freeze it in smaller aliquots, and when I come back, I don't have to rush to the grocery store.
There you go.
Or you freeze the milk?
Yeah, you can freeze your milk.
Nothing wrong with it.
That works just fine. Sorry, it's a little tricky to peel this onion with my gloves, but we are getting there. You all know me, I like to save the scraps. So normally if I were at home, I would be setting these aside in a little Ziploc bag, popping, anytime I peel potatoes or carrots or I have ends of celery or whatnot, I'll keep that in a bag and make my own vegetable stock. So that's a great tip. Just keep it in your freezer and just keep adding to it until you get a full bag of things. Okay.
Same thing with bones and shrimp peels and stuff like that.
Yeah, I'm always trying to tell people to, especially these days with everything going up in price, try to use all of what you're purchasing. Okay, so you all have seen me do this. I like to just kind of clean up this onion. There's a little bit of something on that onion piece there, but I cut it in half, right? I've peeled it, I've cut it in half, and I'm just going to make slices. Now, the quick way to do it is to just follow the ridges on the onion. So as you see, right, it's got the ridges, and I just follow those in one direction and then just make cuts in the other direction to get a dice. However, I like to make it a little bit smaller, so I take my knife in on the side and make a couple slices first. My knife has just been sharpened recently, so it's extra sharp. And this is how I like to cut my onion. But practice makes perfect. And I'm going to watch my oil because I don't want that to get too hot. Okay. Are you all smelling the cauliflower like I am?
Yes.
Yeah, so it's not going to take that long because I cut it in fairly thin pieces.
I always cry when it comes to Raquel.
Ah, yes. I think we've had this conversation. So there's so many like wives' tales. My mom always used to say, well, you have to like light a candle and then stick a piece of bread in your mouth and that'll help. I was like, some people now say, oh, well, if you stick it in the freezer, that'll make sure that, you don't. But I say, make sure you know how to cut an onion and have a sharp knife, and that will help. Okay. That's really, you can try all those things and let me know what works, but My rule of thumb is just make sure you have a sharp
I
knife.
just not puree it, but chop it in the food processor.
Yeah, that, or here's another thing that you could do, and I do this a lot when I'm making like meatballs or meatloaf, is take like the grater that you use for cheese, the larger holes, and just grate your onion. And it releases a lot more of the sort of, well, it might make you cry more because it releases a lot more of the juices and the stuff that makes your eyes water. But I feel like it also gives great flavor because you're getting some of the juice also from the onion. So I tend to do that when I'm making things like, meatloaf. So I don't know if you noticed, I wish I had a camera above me. When I get to the end where I'm afraid I'm going to just lose the balance of this, I just tip it down just to be safe, right? And it might mean that this one in particular, I didn't quite go all the way through because I wanted to keep the onion intact. But I am trying to work with safety first. And so I just tip it on the side.
The onion, when you pull back the skin, but leave the root on so you're holding on to the skin, and then you cut it.
Yeah, you could do that too. That's a great tip. Okay, so that smells delicious. I'm gonna turn this up. You just want to basically saute this onion maybe like a minute or so, just until it softens. You don't want to add any color to it. You could, that's flavor, right? But that would take a little bit longer. And the trick to this is one where you just want to put this all together, pop it in the oven, forget about it for a little while, come back, and you've got this delicious meal. So I'm going to turn this up a bit. Hope I'm going in the right direction. Can't tell with this burner anymore. It's cooking. Okay. I'm going to check my cauliflower real quick here. That seems pretty cooked through. Maybe just another minute, because we're just going to mash that, and I'll talk you through the rest of the ingredients that we have here. So for our meat filling, or the base of this, what we're going to do is we're going to use some grass-fed beef. Now, like I mentioned, you could use any kind of beef. You could also use, if you wanted to, if you're not a fan of beef, ground turkey, ground chicken, venison. Yeah, absolutely. Buffalo, any kind of game, whatever you like would be delicious. I typically don't eat a lot of beef, and so when I do, I tend to, buy the stuff that I like, flavor-wise. And so this one has been kind of a favorite of mine, but it is a very lean ground beef, so it's 93% lean meat and then 7% fat, which, the fat is the flavor, but if you need to watch your diet, for example, or if you just kind of want a little bit more of that, not as, it will release a little bit of moisture. I think that's great for this type of dish, but it's not going to be super soppy and super greasy because there's not a lot of fat in it. And you can see it's got this beautiful red color, but there's not a lot of that fat or marbling that you tend to see in some of the other ground beef. But experiment with whatever your budget allows, and whatever your palate, preferences. But we're using this today. So I'm going to add this. I've kind of just crumbled it up a little already. We're just going to add it until we cook that through and it's no longer pink. Is anybody here sort of a savory versus sweet breakfast kind of person? Couple of you? Yeah. Yeah, I definitely have been more on I grew up having more sweet, but I think as my palate has changed, I definitely prefer to start the day with something a little more savory. So I'm going to put this here. Okay, and one thing I need, I'm going to move this out of the way. Okay, so a couple other things while that's cooking that we're going to add to our filling is just a bag of frozen vegetables. Here's another one. We were talking about rice cauliflower. You can use whatever combination of vegetables you like. If you want to chop up some carrots and, get some string beans and just put that in there, great. I know they make just frozen veggies that are peas and carrots only. If you're not a fan of the corn and the green beans in here, feel free to, change it up a little bit. But it's basically, I believe it was just a pound of frozen vegetables. So we'll add that in a minute. And then the other things that we're going to add, we're going to make a roux. So we did this in another recipe. Remember the first week we did a mac and cheese that had a roux. This is, I didn't do anything gluten-free or vegan, dairy-free. This is all in. We're going all in on this one. So we have our regular whole milk. I am using regular butter. It is unsalted. My palate just over the years and also cooking for other people, I tend to under season because it's easier to adjust, right? If I over salt or over season, you can't take that away. So I tend to be of the persuasion of less is more, and also buying ingredients that already has great, flavor profiles and just are good quality. But salt is one of those things where, since we're talking about salty this week, you really can't take it away once you add it. There's some tricks that you can do, but usually the best course of practice that I recommend to people when they're first kind of learning how to cook or they're trying different recipes is follow the recipe and then adjust, because you can always add a little bit more as needed once everything comes together. One of the things that I was going to talk about, and I can share right now while we're still cooking through this, I'm going to turn our cauliflower on and potatoes off because those are pretty good. And just from the lid holding in the heat, that's going to finish cooking that off. But one of the things I was going to mention, so salt obviously comes in, salt that we use for cooking, right? But it can also come from things like when we're cooking something down. So if you hear of things being reduced, maybe you have a sauce or a soup or something, that means that you're going to be taking out some of the water. It's going to be evaporating and concentrating the flavor, which is great because then you get sort of more of that flavor, but you're also ending up with some of the solids, and typically some of those will be salt. So that's one thing to watch for when, especially restaurants, like they love to do that, right? You taste all these beautiful dishes and you're like, that's so good. How did they do that? Well, they're probably reducing some of those sauces so that the flavor is much more prevalent, more concentrated, and that's why it's so yummy. They're also probably using things like kosher salt, which are great for cooking. I think because a little goes a long way, so it just has kind of that great salt flavor, but it's a little bit different from like table salt. I think table salt has a much more saltier taste, so I don't tend to use a lot of it, but with kosher salt, it just has kind of the bigger flakes or the bigger crystals. And so I feel like it provides more flavor with just a little bit. So that's kind of my preference when I cook. Himalayan salt, I don't tend to cook with that a lot. I tend to see people use that. Yeah, sometimes it's pink. It has these larger grains. I think it tastes okay. A lot of people I see use it sort of also as like a garnish when they're finishing a dish. So I wish I could I've been saying this for years, a whole course on salt, because there's so many different kinds, and people are always curious about like, where does it come from and what are the different ways you can cook with it. I think that could be a whole course.
The pink salt comes from the Himalayas, and the solid version of the salt is black in color. It's more prominent. Yeah. And have you ever tried using potassium chloride? The new salt is a substitute for salt.
I have not.
I'm curious to know what other people thought about it. Yeah. Potassium chloride instead of sodium chloride. It's a new salt. It is sold as HCl. I've been using it all the time.
The fake salt?
It's not fake. It's potassium chloride.
Huh.
Yeah.
Is that like what they put in like the, there are some, who's the brand? Morton maybe makes something?
You have to watch it, how much you're eating and things. So that's why I knew about it long time.
That's interesting. We'll have to check that out. Okay. For
Less salt is good. Less salt is good.
Less salt.
So
Is that the
1
brand?
teaspoon of salt a day is plenty.
yes. Yes, and we'll get to that actually. We have that coming up, but thank you. That's a good foreshadowing. Okay, so our meat is pretty much there. What I'm going to do is add in our vegetables. So, and just remember too, so the vegetables are going to add a little bit of moisture because they've been frozen, right? So there's just a little bit of that in there. Give that a stir. And then the other things we're going to add, just keeping it very simple, is a little bit of garlic powder. So that is going to be just a teaspoon of garlic powder. You could also use onion powder if you didn't have garlic powder, or fresh garlic if you wanted to, and saute that with your onions. And then we're going to also add a little bit of dried thyme. I like making this recipe with fresh thyme, but then you have all of that you need to, put into something. So if you just have this in your pantry, that's great too. So just a teaspoon of dried thyme. And that already smells wonderful. And then just a little salt and pepper, and then some tomato paste. So salt, we're going to just use half a teaspoon. And pepper, I believe we've got a quarter teaspoon of pepper. So I would say, again, adjust your seasoning on this. There's going to be salt in the mashed potato and then also salt in this filling. So if you need to be a little more cautious on your sodium, leave it out. I think the meat tastes really good on its own. Salt does just kind of bring and balance all of the flavors. So we're just going to add just a little bit to this. And then we're going to add 2 tablespoons of tomato paste. Now, if you didn't want to do tomato paste, you could just leave it just like this. I add the tomato paste, and I like the kind that comes in the tube, because when you buy the can, then you end up with, you're like, oh, 2 tablespoons. Now I've got this whole can. I usually put it in a little Ziploc, flatten it out, and put it in my freezer, and then I'll take it out and use it again for something else. But today we're just going to use this little tube. There's all different brands at the grocery store. Try all the different ones and see what you like. I use the tomato paste. It has that great sweet concentrated flavor. Concentrated flavor. And I think it sort of makes this dish a little more richer in flavor just with that. So that's why I add that in there. And this is nice because you can just keep this in the refrigerator. And voila, yeah. So this is coming together beautifully. Smells delicious. What do you guys think so far? Yes, smells good. Okay, and super easy, right? This is what we want. This is kind of like a nice meal. Maybe you make it on Sunday and then you can, I've done this a couple times, and then just, reheat it during the week and you're good to go. It's substantial too. You've got great protein in there. You got your veggies, and then your potato filling is kind of the surprise because you've snuck in some cauliflower. Oh, sorry about that. You've snuck in some cauliflower and you're good to go. So you could just do that and just end there, make your filling, put your mashers on top. We're going to do a little bit more. So what I like to do is make that roux with a little bit of flour and butter. So I'm just going to use today just a tablespoon of unsalted butter, and I'm just thickening up my filling so it has slightly more creamier consistency. I think I experimented and tried it with 2 tablespoons of butter and 2 tablespoons of flour, and I thought that might have been a little too much, so this is just going to be 1 of each. So it's just regular all-purpose flour and 1 tablespoon of softened, so it makes your life a little easier, softened unsalted butter. And as we were doing before, I used some of that plant butter, and you could use that as well if you were watching, you couldn't do the dairy. That would work just as well. The thing with this is we're going to let this cook for a little bit because it's flour and you don't want that flour kind of taste. So once I mix this well, again, it has like that consistency of almost like frosting, and that's what you want. So I'm going to add that to my pan here. Might need another utensil to help me out a little bit. There we go. It's not much, but like I said, you could either leave this out. I like it because it kind of thickens it up and makes it a little more like casserole-y. And then once that's cooked out for a few minutes, we are going to add, just to loosen it, 3/4 cup of chicken stock. You could use vegetable stock if you wanted to, beef stock, water if you wanted to just stay away from the stock. But I'm going to let that cook for just another few seconds there. Okay, and now I'm going to have to do a quick little trick here because I need to figure out where to put this. I forgot, that was the other thing. I forgot a spoon and another pan. But we're going to make it work.
I put mine in the freezer. I chop it up and put it in the freezer.
Yeah. That's going to be roasted, I think. That's okay. So while that is finishing up, I've got my 3/4 cup of stock. I'm going to add that in before I forget. And we'll give that a quick stir. And you will see in a minute how that thickens up. And I'll put that into just basically like an 8x8 baking dish. If you wanted to double this recipe and make like a big lasagna pan and have that out for a potluck, that would be great too. But what I want to do next is show you how we make our mashers. And so I'm just going to take out, this is great too. So the technique of just cooking everything in this pot, right? Not having to cook it separately. You're cooking your potatoes. Obviously, your cauliflower is going to cook a lot faster. It's okay if it gets a little mushy because it's all going to get mashed. So that's not a problem.
That's a combination of potatoes and mashed and cauliflower
Yep.
together.
So you have, yeah, so now we have our yellow potato that's been boiled, and then we have the cauliflower that I added in there. But in the recipe, you'll just put it all in together, you know, bring it up to a boil, and then just check it. Okay, that looks good. So to our mashers, what we're going to add, the secret ingredient here is our Parmesan cheese. I like this kind that's nice and grated. It's got this finer texture. So what I do first is I take my masher and just run that through without adding anything, just to make sure that I get everything mashed up the way that I want the consistency. But I love the flavor of cauliflower, and you know, you could just make straight also cauliflower mashed potatoes without the potato, but I feel like the potato gives it a little bit more structure, more body. And so that's why I usually throw in a potato or two, because otherwise it might be a little too wet. And I don't want it super soggy when I put it on as the topping, right? So that looks pretty good. And then I'm going to add 1/2 cup of Parmesan cheese. So that obviously has salt in it, right? You've got the flavor from that. You could go a little more, a little less. We're doing 2 tablespoons of this butter. Because butter and potatoes, I mean, come on, right? Gotta have that. We're gonna do a little salt and pepper and garlic powder again. So 1/2 teaspoon of garlic powder goes into this one. I'm gonna turn this off because we are good here. So 1/2 teaspoon of garlic powder. And since you've got hot potatoes and cauliflower, what I recommend with the garlic powder, because it tends to get clumpy, is just to lightly sprinkle it so that it doesn't clump up in your potatoes and then somebody doesn't bite into that clump, right? And then 1/2 teaspoon of salt here. You could taste it without the salt and see if you're fine without it. And then just a little bit, maybe just a pinch of black pepper. And then I haven't forgotten, but we're going to add some milk. But I just want to mix this together. It smells delicious. And the milk, so you see it kind of has this nice fluffy texture, right? When we add the milk, it's going to make it just a little bit creamy, like mashed potatoes you probably make at home. So I'm going to do that. And then we're going to add in just 2 tablespoons of our milk. Okay, so in a minute I will put this all together and then you guys get to try it, and we'll talk a little bit more about the topic of salty foods. But this, it doesn't take much. Sometimes people pour like 1/2 a container of milk and they're like, why are my mashed potatoes so gummy or so watery? It's like a little goes a long way. See, now we've got this beautiful creamy texture and I didn't really add much, and that's what we want. Okay, so now to assemble. So I have my pan here. Just going to move a few things out of the way. And what I would like to do is just take our filling and place it on the bottom. You don't have to spray or anything, just take your pan. And it's thickened up a little bit, so you'll see that now. If I can show you kind of it's a little bit more almost like a stew, right? So we're going to pour that into the bottom of our pan. And, you know, when I first made the first round of this recipe, I like mashed potatoes. I mean, who doesn't, right? But the potato was double. And it was a little too much potato for me. I was like, I need a little more protein and not so much potato. So you could try that, experiment. My recipes are always a starting place. But just kind of layer that out. And then what we're going to do is take some of our potato. And I like to just kind of plop it on there. And I'll show you in a minute what I do to dress it up a little bit, make it look a little fancier. Although you could just do that, right? Just spread this out and be done. Pop it in an oven. So you're going to want to preheat your oven, obviously, for about, you want it at 350. Oven's at 350, and you're going to, it's helpful just in case, some of the liquid seeps out a little bit, to put it on a baking sheet. But basically, I just spread this out just to cover everything. Right? I know, I was trying to find containers for you all, but we'll have little containers if anybody wants to take some of this to finish baking it. Because, or just eating this in the car. Yeah. Okay, so the last trick to this is, how when you see this at the restaurant, it's got those cool little streaks on the top. So this is basically how you do it. You take your fork and you can run it I kind of do sort of this fun little swirl pattern just all across the top one way. And then I'll do it the other way in the opposite direction. And so when it bakes up with those nice little ridges.
Fun fact, if you want to make your frosting look like tree bark, you use a fork also.
Yeah, exactly. Like, what is that dessert that's always made during the holidays? Right? Yeah, so it does that. So this is a Pyrex glass pan. I don't recommend broiling that because it will shatter at, a certain high temperature. But if you had just like a regular brownie pan and made that in there, or even just those aluminum pans that you can get that are disposable if you're taking this to a potluck, you could pop this, maybe put a little more cheese on top, and then just place that under the broiler after you've finished baking it. I usually bake this for about 30, 40 minutes, just until some of the, filling seeps up a little bit and starts to bubble, just so it's completely cooked through. Because basically it's already cooked through, you're just kind of warming it, right? So you could make this, pop it in your fridge and then take it out, let it kind of come to room temp a little bit, and then pop it in the oven. Like if you wanted to make it in advance, if you didn't want to bake it right away, or just bake it and then reheat it to enjoy it for the rest of the week. That's usually what I do. So this is pretty much it. So my lovely assistant Rosie is going to make sure that you all get to try this now. I did 2 of these this morning, so we'll see what you guys think. And while she is doing that, what I'd like to do is talk about some more of our things now that I can watch you guys. I feel like I was kind of focused in on the food here. But what do you all think? I mean, it's 2 components, right? You could kind of do these separately if you were short on time, or maybe make the mashed potatoes one day and then do the filling the next day and pull it all together and bake it, right? It's definitely one of those kind of recipes that's homey, it's comforting, it has some great elements to it, but we just changed a couple of things, right? So it's just got some slightly different twists to it. But I'm curious to see what you guys will think. So that'll be coming around in a bit here. If you take a look at the backside of our recipe, what I wanted to focus on today was the flavor of salt and saltiness, right? And those are some of the things I know sometimes for me, it's either a salt or a sweet. When you're stressed out or you're craving something, those are the things that you go for. And so I just wanted to walk through a couple of things. And Seema mentioned one of the things I was going to mention, which is, so typically salt is something that our bodies need, right? It helps us maintain balance for things like the functioning of our body fluids, our muscles, and our nerves. And that's really important. When you feel a little bit off, always good to just go see your doctor, make sure all of those things are in balance. But the dietary guidelines for Americans recommends less than 2,300 milligrams of sodium daily, which is just the equivalent of 1 teaspoon of salt. So you saw me measuring things today. 1 teaspoon of salt a day is this. Like if you think about table salt and what we used, this is not a lot, right? And so a lot of times we're consuming salt in so many different ingredients, different products if we're going out to eat. And so we're way surpassing that. And the consequences are that we can have some health complications. So sodium in foods comes from, commercial processing, things that we purchase at the store that are already pre-packaged maybe or already made for us. There's a lot of sodium in that. So remember last week we were talking about nutrition labels and making sure that you're looking at that when you're purchasing things that are already prepared. But it's also naturally occurring in some of the foods. So like today I was talking about Parmesan cheese, obviously a source of sodium. It's naturally salty. Things like olives I love to add into foods or dishes that I make because I won't add as much salt. So if you're looking for ways to cut back on salt, but you still want that flavor, look at things like that. I talked about reductions of sauces and things like that. That's going to give you flavor, but that's also going to concentrate things like sodium too. So just be careful of that. So the health complications that can arise from overconsumption of sodium include things like high blood pressure, obviously cardiovascular disease, kidney disease, and stroke. And so in addition to maintaining a healthy low sodium diet, other things that you want to include to keep your sodium in check are increasing your water consumption, right? We're always being told, drink more water. And sometimes, like myself included, I have a hard time doing that. And so we have to get into the habit of that because sodium, increasing your water consumption and exercise, obviously, can help flush out extra sodium through things like sweating, keeping us properly hydrated, and making sure that our kidneys are functioning regularly. You can also consume foods rich in potassium, such as bananas, right, or avocados, because they help with sodium excretion as well. So sometimes things are connected in that way, and we forget about it. But the body, I always like to say, the body will tell you when you're off or you're deficient in something. And a lot of times, like people will say, it's not that I'm hungry, it's just that I'm dehydrated and I just need to stop and drink more water. So when it comes to managing sodium in our home cooking, we want to look for recipes and use ingredients like spices and herbs and low sodium foods, and then just use smaller quantities. So, we used a little bit, about half a cup of Parmesan for this whole batch, right? You could cut that back even further if you wanted to and try that and see how that tastes. Things like condiments, we all have, if you look inside your refrigerator, the whole refrigerator door is packed with the mustards, the pickles, the olives, all of that kind of fun stuff, and just kind of keep an eye on the sodium in that. And then, like I said, be mindful of those recipes that call for things like reductions, because you want to make sure that you're watching your sodium when you use recipes like that. One last thing on sodium. So a lack of sodium can also signal a couple other things. Physically, it could indicate that we're not sufficiently hydrated or our bodies are stressed. And you might also ask yourself, though, what are other areas in your life where you may be feeling depleted or lacking? Are you gravitating towards saltier food choices to help you fill up or help you feel more balanced? So our bodies are amazing and they're intelligent at giving us these cues and our signals. And so our response to that should be to pay more attention and to be more in tune with our bodies, right? So stay in tune with your body, listen for those signals, and just be mindful of, we have a lot of choice that we get to exercise when we go to the grocery store, when we go out to dine, when we prepare the foods that we prepare for our loved ones at home. But sodium is one that we definitely want to be mindful of and be careful of because of, obviously the health risks that can be complicated if we overconsume sodium. So salty, like for me, I think about it's, yes, the flavor, but it's also texture. So the picture of the French fries or the potato chips, right? Like sometimes that's part of it too. And there are so many good products out there. I think part of it too is learning to exercise like how to make things that fulfill those flavor profiles that you crave. Because when you're cooking at home, obviously you have more ability to control the levels of sugar, salt, all that seasoning, and you do it to your taste preference, right? And so that's a little bit healthier for us too. So let me know what you all think as the samples are coming around. It's definitely something that is kind of like a heartier meal, something that can be prepared, on a weekend and maybe enjoyed throughout the week. But it has kind of a nice, slightly different twist on just our regular shepherd's pie, right? We've got some different elements in there. We've added a little more vegetable to it. And hopefully you all enjoy it. So awesome.
The flavor is
Very good
wonderful.
flavor.
Fantastic.
I would want a little crispy element on top, maybe fried onions.
That would be fantastic. Yes. Yes. So something crunchy on top would be great. We were just talking about the potato chips, right? But maybe some fried onions would be great. Or even you could put like some panko breadcrumbs, and when you broil it, that would make it nice and crunchy, kind of like the mac and cheese that we were talking about earlier. Okay, ladies. Well, if there are no other questions, I thank you all for coming today, this morning. And then we're going to wrap up next week, week 4. We have a delicious chicken soup recipe coming to wrap things up for our series. And yeah, I hope to see you next week. All right, thanks.
Can I say something about soy?